And let me tell you this right now. Don't you dare throw in the towel. Regardless of what season you're in right now, do not throw in the towel. You're built and designed for this moment in time in history. I understand pain, and I understand struggle, and I understand those moments where it can feel like that there is complete 100% despair and there is no hope. I have been there. But let me tell you, do not throw in the towel. God, in His infinite wisdom, by design, put you in this moment in history for a destiny and a purpose that no other human being on the face of this earth can fulfill but you. It's about one person making a decision that he or she wants his character to be able to affect other people's lives in a positive way, like the butterfly effect. Hey y'all, welcome back to the podcast where God reigns and the sun shines. Hey, I'm going to be talking that I believe is the most important thing for a human being's life. And what is that? I can make an entire library on this subject, I truly do believe, and I've been processing on it for over a week because I really want this podcast to bring justice to the topic at hand. And what is that? It is the fact that every human being is a three-part human. We are spirit, we are soul, and we are body. Do you know, I looked this up, do you know that each calendar year that 750 billion is spent on beauty products for the outward appearance? And I want to be very clear on this, that like our body is the temple and there needs to be a priority on the temple, but it also doesn't need to be the main focal point. And I'm older now, and so I know that through my years of living on this earth that there have been times when I put more emphasis, let's say, for instance, on my hair or what I'm wearing on the outside. And I think all of those things need to have an outward appearance that are good, but they can also be, we can put too much emphasis on a particular thing. Our fitness, do you know how much is spent on fitness? Which does have a positive attribute to it, but fitness every year is $850 billion. We are spirit, we are soul, and we are body. And out of those three things, only one thing lives throughout eternity, which is our spirit. And unfortunately, even though there is sermons and there are things that we can do in order to be able to mature that inward man up into maturity, there's just not as much in this world. There's just not as much focal point. I say again, imagine 750 billion. I didn't say that was over a decade. 750 billion, almost $1 trillion, or working on $1 trillion spent annually on beauty products. 850 billion on fitness. And I can assure you that that same amount of dollar figure is not concentrated on the one area that's going to live for eternity. Look, if you're a child of the living God, you know as well as I do that we came from dust and we'll return to dust. At least this body does. My body and my soul, which is my brain. Do I believe in education? Absolutely I do. Do I believe in getting intelligence? Absolutely I do. But I'm going to tell you this, that wisdom is the most important. The Bible's very clear that it says that wisdom is always speaking. The question is are we listening? Are we retaining that wisdom? Are we making it a part with truth that can set us free internally on the inside, on our spirit man, that we become kind of like an onion from layer to layer. You know, you've seen an onion before, and you're pulling back each layer. Well, the Bible clearly says that we're changed from glory to glory, to faith, and that is a process. And that's not overnight. Multiple seasons. It makes me think of David, the mighty man, the king of Israel. But did you know that he was anointed as a boy to be king, but it took 17 years before he became the king of Judah? And then it was 4 or 5 years after that before he became the king of Israel. You know, there's always a testing time in the kingdom of God, and that is for our best interest. It's for us eternal, and our Father who is in heaven knows exactly what we need in order to mature us. The Bible says that when I was a child, I thought as a child, but when I became a man, I put away childish things. That doesn't happen overnight. It happens through a process. It happens through seasons. It makes me think of, did you know, it's a true story. There was once a scientific, what do you call that? A scientific thing that they were doing, and they thought that they could possibly mass produce trees at a faster rate. And so they set up this place for trees to mature and to grow, and they watered them. They gave them all the best, and they put barriers around it so it couldn't get storm access. And basically, I'm going to say that they coddled these trees until they became of such a height where they could then harvest them and then turn them into 2x4s. Do you know that on the outward appearance, it looked like a 2x4, smelled like a 2x4, it was a 2x4, but do you know that you could break that 2x4 with your hands when it was all said and done? And of course, they scrapped that idea. I'm making that as for us as well. I get it. There are a lot of times by our emotions and our feelings that we really want to walk through a rose garden, that we really don't like pain, and we really don't gravitate towards struggle, and we sure a lot of times don't want to look at our own personal issues. But that is what matures us up over time. Let me think of Moses, for instance. Do you know that at one point in time, if you know the story, he was, the prince of Egypt. And I'm sure he ate what he wanted to eat, slept where he wanted to sleep, and he had all the fine amenities of Egypt. And then he's called by God and he leaves out of Egypt. Do you know that he's on the backside of the desert for 40 years? There's a lot of training process by God himself that was training Moses for the task at hand, for the call. And I'll say this as well, is that God desires, through his will and through his purpose, that every son and daughter of him is an A-string player. We know this in football. You got your A string and you got your B string. God desires, I'll say that again, God desires that every son and daughter of God be an A-string player. I am not talking about standing behind a pulpit and speaking to thousands. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about fulfilling the God-given call that's on each and every one of us. And each and every one of those are equally just as important. Unfortunately, heartbreakingly, I would say in the percentage is a lot less that actually fulfill the call than those that do and don't. And why is that? I believe we can hone it down to the fact that the cares of this world, He said, why store up things that the cankerworm can eat? And I'll say right now that one day we can put so much importance on gathering items. We can put so much importance on the vehicles that we drive, the houses that we own, how much money that we have, and every bit of that substance is going to be evaporated at one point in time in our life. I'll say it like this. I once saw this, so it's not something that I came up with. I saw it in a video, but I think it's very profound. 100 years from Wade's life right now, somebody's probably going to own my land. 100 years from now, somebody's probably going to own my house. 100 years from now, the money that was in my account is going to be moved over into somebody else's account. We put so much emphasis on what we can see in the natural mindset of the outside of the eye. And what I want this podcast to be on is, and the reasons for a lot of prayer on this podcast is because it is the most important thing in the son or the daughter of God walking out their purpose in this life. And of course, it says very clearly, and we know this, and none of us are promised tomorrow. I don't know in my appointed time. I don't know when my card will be pulled and when I go home. But I do know this. I want my heart inside, my spirit man, I want it centrally focused upon God's will, God's plan, and his purpose for my life. Why do I say that? Do I say that because I want to sound spiritual, or I want to sound, I'll even use the word religious? Absolutely not. In fact, far from it. What I have come to learn through time and through seasons is a life lived on purpose is a life fulfilled. That's what I've come to learn. And I'm going to say, in the good, the bad, the ugly. We wouldn't have Joseph without him being in the well. When his brothers pushed him over into the well. Do you know, I pondered it, and I thought, how would I be if his brothers sought to kill him? If you know the story, the brothers were jealous of him, and the brothers sought to kill him, and so they just didn't just kill him one afternoon. They literally threw him over into a well to suffer a long way of dying. And I think, I can't back this up, but if I was Joseph and I was thrown at the bottom of the well, and my first several hours were screaming for somebody to come help me, to get me out, there comes a time of looking in the mirror of my own life. And I think Joseph was doing a lot of soul searching. They call that soul searching. I think there was a lot of soul searching that was going on with Joseph when he was at the bottom of the well. So could we say that the well has purpose? Absolutely. Could we say that Jonah, when he was swallowed up by a big fish, that there was purpose? Yeah, we could actually say that. Did we say that while Moses was on the backside of the desert and going around snakes and scorpions, that there was purpose in that? Yeah, absolutely. You cannot, and this is so good, but there's so many messages out there that only, look, we need mountaintop experiences. They're valid, and they speak to us, and they encourage us, and they help us, and they give us hope. But in order to have, I like to say it like this, in order to have trophies of faith in the trophy cabinet means that there was a struggle in order and a testing, because faith comes by hearing, and hearing by the word of God. And without faith, it's impossible to please him. And so and faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. So while we're in the time and the season of testing, faith can be established. And then I call them faith trophies in the trophy cabinet. But in order to be able to know what hope is, listen to me, in order to be able to know what hope is, you also have to know what desperation is. In order to know what light is, you also have to know what darkness is. In order to know what peace is, and in its power and and knowing that it is peace, that you have to have seasons, or there are seasons where, I have the blue ribbon of my childhood. I've done podcasts on that based on my childhood and what I experienced of anxiety, of fear, and then understanding what that sweet, the peace that passes all understanding that holds us together. So, but there are so many messages that only focus upon hope, upon peace, upon and I know that simultaneously, if we're going to talk about hope, we also need to talk about desperation, or we need to talk about destruction. Because you remember the scripture that says we overcome by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of our testimony? That means the testimony is not just all of the good, it's all of it. You've heard me say this before, that you cannot be a Paul without a Saul. There's a purpose in the process. And that process cannot be overstepped. It cannot be overlooked, because it was because of the process that made the purpose explode. I'm going to say that again. It's because of the process that made the purpose explode. It made it come to life. It gave breath. It gave oxygen to that. So, speaking about, personal testimony, there's two things on this podcast that, and I'm going to say this, I've never shared these two things that I'm going to share on this podcast. I have never shared them on a microphone, much less on a camera. And the moment that you do that, it's there for all time, because once it goes into the internet, you can't pull it back. So I'm keenly aware of that, but I'm going to share two things that are personal to me. It is my heart that I want to share with you. So where do I begin with that? Because I'm going to tie the spirit and the soul and the body. I'm going to tie with my testimony these two things back together, and prayerfully by the end of this podcast that I have done justification, and I have made, and God has helped me clear the muddy water to bring forth a understanding of enjoying and embracing the process, regardless of what that process may be. And for me, I'm going to bring forth the testimony of my son's passing, because that was a crushing of my spirit. It says very clearly that the Lord is near to the brokenhearted, and he saves those crushed in spirit. Keep that thought process. He saves those who are crushed in spirit. And that is the best way that I can describe, after my son's passing, that I was crushed. I would say, oh my gosh, there was a time in the first couple of years that, if I backed myself up, and I was doing this podcast in that first couple of years, I would definitely be crying. I don't even know if I would be able to compose myself enough in order to produce what I'm saying to you. But through the process and seeing life through different eyes is where I want to speak from. So, if you don't know, my son passed on April 6th, 2012. back a decade ago at 10:13 in the morning. It happened to fall on a Good Friday. And he fell asleep behind the wheel of his pickup truck. He was 6 weeks before graduating. And he went head on with a tractor. His truck exploded on impact. And one moment he was here, and in less than 4/10 of a second, he's in eternity and in the arms of Jesus. Now, I'm going to back this up 4 months to one afternoon. You know, his brother, my other son, Cooper, has always loved Christmas lights and always loved this time of the year for Christmas. And so even though it took physical work, me and Ryan, our job every year was to put the Christmas lights up and, of course, take them down. And wow, this is 4 months before. I just even have to scratch my head, because I was up on the ladder. I say again, I've never shared this before. I was up on the ladder, and I was taking I can even see myself doing it right now. I was taking the lights off, and I recalled a memory that I had of us back being in high school, and a young man at the age of 18 that I went to school with fell out of the bed of the pickup and was killed instantly. And the whole town, I'm not going to name the town, the whole town, of course, was shaken through this young man's passing. And while I was up there pulling these lights off, and I was thinking about how me being a father would be. And of course, knowing that behind me, Ryan was down there winding up the Christmas lights, I put myself really in that father's shoes. And I thought, man, there would be no greater pain that a father could experience than to bury his child. And so I came off the ladder, and Ryan had a Carhartt coat on that day. It was kind of chilly out. And I remember looking at him, and I grabbed him by his coat, and I pulled him in tight, and I said, look, I just had a memory of a young man that I went to school with who passed, and how the whole town was crushed and devastated. And I said, son, you're 18. I said, the devil is a roaring lion seeking who he may devour. And I looked him in his eyes, and I said, you need to be awake in the moment. And I said, look, the devil has no power, not that God gives. And I said, but I'm telling you right now that if I was to lose you, it would be the only thing that could shake my faith. And we embraced and really didn't talk about it again. Now, that was 4 months before. And then Ryan happens on April 6th. And I did not share that intimate moment with anybody in the beginning. Eventually I did. I had to, because I felt personally trapped, as though my words let me say it this way. I'd come to think that my words that I said sealed his death sentence. Does that make sense? It would be very humanly, commonly, with the thought process of saying that 4 months before, and definitely remember saying it, that in somehow cosmic way that I had sealed his death sentence because I said that. Well, that's actually not true. So I had to go to some counseling. I had to go to some pastors. I had to sit down and get in some deep weeds on that and unfold that and understand that number one, I'm not God and you're not God. And ultimately, God is the one who has the set appointments for each one of us. But I will tell you that the reason why I just shared that story with you is because the reality of that statement is that it did shake my faith. The reality is it shook it to the core. I say that, and if you know me personally, by measured by character, being in the public school system, doing what we do, and we just finished number 139. None of that in the message was birthed overnight. It was birthed from the time I was born. There were many different circumstances along the way. So when I say that I had faith trophies in the trophy cabinet before April 6th, I most definitely did. But this particular one, I was ground into fine powder. And this was not a process. I talked earlier about a process, right? And how that process has a purpose. But this process was over and still going on to this day, a decade later. But in the first initial explosion of fine powder, I was definitely in the valley of death. I'm going to say it that way. The scripture says, yea, though I walk through the valley of death, I will fear no evil, for thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. But for Wade, personally, 100%, I was in the valley. I don't want to say early on, but I want to say eventually, months began to see glimmers. I'm going to use them glimmers of hope. Not in the beginning. I was holding on nothing but the hem of his garment. And honestly, I'm going to say this right now in this podcast. I'm going to be truthfully, brutally honest with you. That in the beginning, you know, they say you can't see the forest for the trees. I was, if I had to lay a bet down, I didn't see and couldn't see how God could heal me. And sure would not, if God could turn around, this is good. If God could turn around and show me who I would be a decade later, over a decade later, it would still be hard for me to visually or to conceptually understand it. I'm sure it would be for David. I'm sure it would have been for Joseph. I'm sure it would have been for Moses. And I'm sure that if you're still on this podcast and you're listening to me and you know, because we all have a story, right? We all have a story that's unique and only to us. And I'm sure that if you're still here, that there are crushing moments that are being brought up to you in this moment. But I will say that through the years and the process, I have learned how to be resilient. I've learned going through the storms and through the crushing. I've learned through wisdom how to dive deep into his word and to get my personal feet established upon a rock. And making the focal point not so much the outward appearance of what you can see on the outside, but the internal part that's going to live on in eternity, which is my spirit on the inside. Man, it's been a journey. And I can look back and say that, boy, there was a time I couldn't say this, but that the journey has been a blessing. I would say, even though I would change it 1,000 times over, I wouldn't change a thing. I know that's kind of tongue-in-cheek, but, the 139 schools wouldn't have happened. I wouldn't be the same individual that I am today. And I'm asking for you watching this podcast to kind of put yourself in this same situation. Not that I prayerfully hope that there's not been a son or a daughter that has passed, but I know some people who watch these podcasts. And so I'm going to say it this way. There's nothing greater than being on the Potter's wheel and having him mold us, form us, and shape us. I know I've done it for myself in my early years for my own personal life and wondered why early in my life, why I had to go to outside circumstances to somehow feel better. Man, it's much better. I'm telling you. It's much better. Look, and the world's broken and things are going to happen. It's much better to walk with the Lord because with him, you know that you're walking a purpose on purpose. And also simultaneously, whatever we're walking through, what he did promise, I think it's very apropos that I say this on this podcast right now, that, there's an old saying that God will never give you more than you can handle. Can I tell you that that's not true? There's nowhere in the Word of God you're going to find that. In fact, there are more things that through my life that Wade White couldn't handle. Like the burying of my child. It wasn't because I'm some great godly man that this happened to me and somehow I could no. The fact of the matter is that coming to a realization of getting out of myself and saying, man, I need God. I need his hand. I need his provision. I need his guidance. I need his wisdom. Is without seeing the full test, and it also, how we took tests when we were in school and we didn't know what the well, we didn't know what the questions were going to, we didn't know what the questions on the test were going to be. Not unless we got a cheat sheet somewhere. But I'm talking about a real bona fide test of not knowing what the questions were going to be. Do you know that the teacher is silent? That the teacher is silent while we're taking the test. Well, a lot of times, I don't know what season of life you're on at the moment, but a lot of times those seasons with feelings can be very dry, as though God's not speaking at all. I know I've been there. But I am reminded of, where were you, God? Remember the footprints in the sand? You've seen that. You know that whoever drew that image of just seeing two footprints in the sand, and the question was, God, where were you? Where are you? And the fact that, the moral to that image is the fact that there's only one set of footprints in the sand instead of two sets of footprints, is because he was carrying us, and there's only one set of footprints. There is a peace that passes all understanding when we truly let go. And when we get out of ourselves and we just have a peace and release of hands wide open, of heart wide open, and saying, you know what, God, I can't handle this on my own. I need you, God. And I let go of the reins, and he takes them. And I've seen more wisdom when I've let go than when I have held on. And that being said, I pray that you don't think that I bunny hop a lot. I've come to realize in my life that, especially when I'm speaking, if I just free fall and just allow him to move through me, it comes out the way that it's supposed to. So we're centering still around the spirit man, because I'm talking about that time in my life where my spirit was crushed. Going back to the same scripture that he's near to the brokenhearted, but he saves those who's crushed in spirit. And I can testify, I couldn't back then, and I already have told you that I was keenly aware in those early days that I saw and I shared with pastor friends of mine that I couldn't see how God was going to be able to heal this scenario. And I've come to learn that love is a eternal product, and grief is actually love. And so if I think I'm going to be completely healed with not anything else to work upon, then I'm actually being misled. I've come to learn that this is going to be a process. Nobody arrives until we draw our last breath. And so the process of maturity is an ongoing process until we draw our last breath. Bringing up David again, that when he was anointed and when the Spirit of God came upon him, it took him 17 years from that moment until he became the king of Judah. Then 4 or 5 years after that. So what were the processes? What were the processes that David had to go through? I mean, he had already killed Goliath when he was young, but there was still process that God was taking David through to become the king of Israel. And us all being like David, we're all in a process. Can I say to embrace, let go the process of whatever season you're in? And I'm going to say this as boldly because I can declare it, even with the process of bearing a child. I will say that there is wisdom for everything in life that God has, and it's in His Word. He has the answer on everything. And on any process in any season that we could go through, there is wisdom that can be obtained. The question is are we reaching to obtain it? Father, as I walk through this pain, show me your wisdom to obtain. So I want to share this second thing with you. And, you know, one of the rules of thumb is that when you're doing a podcast, that you don't want to start reading something, or you don't want to have pregnant pauses because you might lose the audience. But let me say this. I'm fixing to read something. I'm going to read it, but I'm going to stop. And the reasons why I am is because, number one, I'm a human being and I can get things wrong. And with what I'm going to read to you, I want to do 100% justice to it. Again, it's never been shared before on an open mic. But my goodness, does it speak about everything that I'm talking about. And little did I know that in that first year that me and my wife walking in that season of life, that God would intersect us many different times. But on this particular thing that I'm fixing to share with you. So there's going to be moments that I'm going to read, and then there's going to be moments that I'm going to stop, because I want what my wife did was, when this happened, and we call it the angel on the beach encounter. For us, it was like an angel, especially during that time in our lives that I've already shared with you. But what my wife did that I did not do, you know how you can say a story to one individual and you get down here to the 10th person and that story has now kind of changed. Well, I don't want this story to change. So I want to share this with you in its entirety, because when this happened, my wife went upstairs the same day. She got on her laptop and she put down word for word because she didn't want to miss anything. So without any further ado, I want to read the angel on the beach encounter that we had. And I want to say that this happened to us the first Christmas coming out of Ryan's passing. So he passed in April, and then this happened to us in that first in 2012 December, because there was no way on God's green earth that I or anybody else was going to go through that Christmas time in that house with all those memories. I know there are families that do it. There was an area that I just didn't want to do. And God bless those families that do. But for us, so what we did is we packed up and we got a condo in Destin, Florida, and we went there. So Laura starts this off by saying, "Hope I can describe this. It was so much more than I can articulate and describe. It's almost impossible to articulate all that occurred with mere written words. The surreal, the feelings of the actual reality somehow lose impact when trying to put it on paper." And that is so true. "I simply may not do this story justice." She goes on to say, the first Christmas after Ryan passed, which I've already shared with you, December 2012, we couldn't stay at home because the house screamed memories of days of Christmas past. Wow, and I just thought for a second, I think today is December. What is today? Today's December the 4th. We're fixing to come into Christmas time. And here I am sharing this. You know, Christmas can be for some, be a very stressful and anxious and time of the year. Wow. Stay with me. This is going to speak. Memories filled with intense pain that pierced our hearts like flaming daggers. So we packed up and we left to go to Destin, Florida, the ocean, the horizon, the doorway to heaven. Once there, it took me 3 days to get Wade out of the condo to walk on the beach. He had been cycling between sad, I can't read that next word on air, sad, moody, crying, and angry. She probably would have told me, she'll probably tell me, well, you should have put it down because that's how you were. I told you guys I was crushed into fine ash. We finally got out, started walking towards the old dilapidated pier, about a mile down that beach. And she puts in here, those are the pictures that I had posted on Facebook. I want to say something about that pier that she just referenced. You know, the night before what I'm reading you occurred, I was in a bad place. And if the truth be told, wow, do I share this part of it? It didn't start out this way, but it ended up this way during this time. I had a very hard time sleeping because of memories flooding my mind. I mean, my gosh, my mind was like a shutter off a camera. It would just smoke of memories. And it had started out with drinking a half a glass of wine to go to sleep. But by the time we got to Destin, Florida, so my situation would be is that I would open a bottle of wine, and before long I'd realize that I had finished that. And so this night before, I had done just that. And I had found myself at the top of the condo, out on the balcony, all by myself, looking up in the stars of heaven. I remember that part very clearly. Bawling, crying. Everybody else was asleep. It was just me and God, and missing my boy, and had drank too much wine. And somehow, in some way, I had gravitated my eyes, because I was looking over the top, and I had even thought this, well, if I jump off the top of this pier, I'm not going to die. I'm just going to break a leg because it ain't high enough. I remember that thought very clearly. And let me tell you this right now. Don't you dare throw in the towel. Regardless of what season you're in right now, do not throw in the towel. You're built and designed for this moment in time in history. I understand pain, and I understand struggle, and I understand those moments where it can feel like that there is complete 100% despair and there is no hope. I have been there. But let me tell you, do not throw in the towel. God, in his infinite wisdom, by design, put you in this moment in history for a destiny and a purpose that no other human being on the face of this earth can fulfill but you. So don't do it. We need you. Seriously, we need you. As I looked over that balcony, out of the corner of my eye, there was a pier. And it caught me, and I looked at it, And in the state I was in, I thought it was pretty cool because I was thinking to myself, well, how could they build this pier out on the ocean to go out there, and the work that it took in order to be able to do it? So to me, I was really focused upon that pier. So, and then after that, I turned around, I looked up in the stars of heaven. I remember this very clearly. After me crying out to God and all of that, I looked up in the stars of heaven and I said, well, you probably haven't heard a single word I've said because of what I drank. And so I'm going to bed, and I shut the door. Now I'm going to continue to read, because this pier is very important of what would happen less than 24 hours later. We finally got out and started walking towards the old dilapidated pier, about a mile down the beach. I got to stop right here and say that there's one part in here that she didn't put in here, and I remember it very clearly. I remember us standing there. It was beginning to be dusk. We weren't saying a word. We were looking out at the ocean and the position of the sun, and me and her wasn't saying two words to each other. I know that I had tears falling off my cheek, and I know she did too. And I remember very clearly not saying a word, and then all of a sudden she goes, well, this didn't turn out the way I thought, and she began to turn to walk back up towards the condo. And I said, hold on just a second. I said, I saw this pier last night, and I think if we walk down there to that pier and then we turn around and walk back, that the sun will be down by then. And I said, so let's do that. And so she agreed, and then we took off. So I'll continue. About a mile down from that pier, a man, his wife, and their daughter were standing there. And after watching me and Wade take pictures of each other, the man offers to take our picture together. I showed him how to use my phone, and he took 2 pics of me and Wade, which I also posted. After we say thank you, they walk away. I turn around to continue our walk, and in front of me, a very elderly woman is being helped by her husband, what appears to be her grown daughter and her granddaughter, with multiple other family members standing within their circle. They were trying to get her next to a pier beam close to the water's edge so they could take some for her. It was so enduring. A multi-generational family, loving and encouraging, all being together. I watched them for a second or two, realizing Ryan would never be able to do that with me or Wade. And I got to tell you something, guys and gals. I was standing there observing this and watching this take place, and my heart was shattered. Because while they were asking for us to take these pictures, I was like, oh my gosh. I know what's running through her heart. This ain't never going to happen. She's never going to be able to experience this. And my heart, oh my gosh, my heart was bleeding because she was never going to be able to experience this with Ryan. Now, we are with Cooper and my grandbaby now, but during this moment in time, it seemed like everything. I watched them for a second or two and realized that Ryan would never be able to do that with me or Wade. And then burst into tears, loud ones. They were only about 3 or 4 feet away, and I was mortified. So I ran off so they couldn't hear me. Wade quickly realized the entirety of what was happening and came after me. Well, I realized it while it was going on. But I mean, what do you do as a husband? How do you comfort in that situation? The beach was basically deserted away from the pier. So I cried into his chest for a time. I remember that like it was yesterday. Literally, not only did she cry, folks, she grabbed hold of my shirt and bit with her teeth on my shirt and let out a wailing scream that I don't even think movies could really do justice and justify that motherly, intense wail. She says, after settling myself down, we started to walk again. And I got to stop right here and put a cliff note in. That this did happen, and she screamed in my chest and then turned around and walked. And, you know, of course, being on the ocean and with the sand, I have been raised up with cowboy boots all my life. I've never been a flip-flop person. I've never worn flip-flops like they're an actual shoe. In fact, there's many years of my life where I just never wore them at all. Still, really, I don't today, and especially very hard to do that in sand. I know a lot of people do, but for me, I don't. And I don't like sand between my toes, and especially having flip-flops or something between my toes. I'm telling you this for a reason, because she was just, when she turned away from me and began to walk, she began to walk away from me, and all I could see is her back. But because I was concentrated on what was coming between the toes and the sand, I kept my head down looking while I was walking. And I'm telling you this because in the next few moments, it didn't come audibly. It should, I mean, it might have been audibly. I don't know. But I know this. I knew it like the back of my hand. I wasn't thinking about God on this moment at all. But I heard these 2 words so profoundly loud, with, as a father not scolding, but with a father that wants to get your attention. That's the best way I'm going to say it. I heard these 2 words, be quiet. And for people who personally know me, know that that's a very hard thing for me to do. But I heard those 2 words while I was looking down at my feet, knowing that she was about 10 or 15 feet in front of me. I heard those words, be quiet. And then I thought to myself, while I was still looking down, be quiet? What does that mean? Now I'm going to continue to read. After a bit, the man who had taken our pictures came up on the left side of where we were slowly walking up the beach. He was walking backwards, bending at the knees, and then clapping his hands. It was a very odd sight, so we stopped and watched him for a minute. His wife was about 20 feet back, and the little girl was walking in between them towards the man, though with great difficulty, physically flailing as she tried to run. Very key point of this. They were Caucasian, and the little girl appeared to be of Eastern Indian descent. Watching this precious little girl, we quickly realized she had a physical disability of some sort, but we couldn't figure out exactly what. The man continued to clap and call her towards him. And when he did, she would awkwardly run towards him. Another beautiful, enduring family scene. More tears for me, she says. I was lost in my head, crying and hurting and praying and walking. Again, she's 15 feet in front of me. And I got to say this, folks. Me and her did not say anything to each other while we saw this couple with this precious daughter. Me and Laura didn't say anything to each other. But I remember thinking to myself, my heart was breaking towards that daughter and that family because it was very obvious that something was wrong. And I remember having those thoughts cognitively inside of me, but I never shared them with Laura, and Laura never shared them with me. And she says, out of nowhere, a man appeared by my side and touched my shoulder. Now, I'm going to tell you, while I was looking down and I heard two words from the Lord say, be quiet. This was simultaneously going on. She says, I jumped out of my skin for a brief second and glanced around and quickly to see where Wade was. He was about 10 to 15 feet behind me, and Wade nodded his head yes at me. So I turned back to the man, and after I looked into his face, that instant fear quickly disappeared because his eyes were filled with nothing but love. I'm going to tell you that it was surreal to me. I'm 1 minute looking down at my feet. I hear be quiet, and the next I look up, and I've always, and I still am to this day, I'm very guarded. I see this man that don't know where he came from because there's a wall right there where me and Laura was walking, and there's nobody on the beach. It's Christmas time. There's nobody on the beach anywhere except that one family, and they're back towards the pier, back this way. So it was, I immediately in my heart said, angel, God. I mean, where did this guy come from? But I also knew I've shared on other podcasts before that during that moment in time in my life, that because I wasn't focused on anything, it was almost as though I could hear the whisper of God, and he had told me to be quiet. I'll continue to read. This is so beautiful. His first words said, with a calm, peaceful smile, were, there is nothing greater than love, is there? These are the very first words that this, I'm going to say stranger, that Laura has never, nor I have ever seen before. That's the first words out of this person's mouth. Still trying to right myself, she says, trying to figure out where he came from, I blurted out, there most certainly was not. And then said, and love of family is the greatest. I'm standing there looking at him like, what is going on? Who are you? Where did you come from? And what are you doing talking to me? I couldn't speak. Volcanic seas lump in my throat. So I just nodded my head, and he continued talking while we were slowly walking down the beach. I could see Wade still walking calmly about 10 feet behind us out of my peripheral vision. I must note that Wade's normal reaction to strangers coming up to me, especially men, is to pounce at the speed of light to rescue me, all John Wayne-like, redneck. That's me. But he was just walking behind us, as calm as it could be, with a serene expression on his face. The man pointed to a couple with the little girl. Oh my gosh. Don't make me cry. The man pointed to the couple with the little girl who were far up ahead of us at this point and said, this is my family. I watch over them. The little girl is blind. Listen to this, folks. Lord God, the little girl is blind and her father. And her father claps so she can respond to the sound. And happily gets to run down the beach. She instinctively follows him. Now, this man is explaining this to Laura, and I'm overhearing this. She she follows him, knowing he's there, even though she cannot see him. It's quite beautiful, really, he says. Laura says, I said, it certainly is. And he smiled at me and told me, you love your family and children very much. And she says to herself in here in quotation marks, how did he know I had children? She never said to him that we did. She said, I just said yes, I truly do. I then started crying softly. Trying not to howl. With the pain and with that pain would surely scare the crap out of him, she says. He merely placed his hand on my shoulder and without saying a word and kept walking beside me. We walked in silence until we were in front of the walkway to our condo. I told him this was my stop and thanked him for the walk. He turned around and facing me and said, the beach is a comforting spot. God is here, don't you think? Laura says in here, hello, Bizarroville. What is going on here? I looked around for Wade, and he had stopped walking, but was standing about 5 feet from us, and he just smiled at me. I told this sweet man standing in front of me that there was no doubt God was everywhere, but I personally thought that the doorway to heaven was at the horizon of the ocean, exactly at the point where the ocean reaches the sky. The man, the woman, and the blind child walked past us at that time, going down the sidewalk that left the beach area. They never spoke, never made eye contact with him or with me or with Wade. They just walked right past us. Remember, he said that that was his family and he watched over them. He looked over at them as they passed and he said, they really are special family. They were where his family and they have 3 children. One born with severe disabilities. I told him that was chili bumps, phenomenal, and hearing this had made my day. Further commenting that he was very blessed to have such a family. He reiterated that there is nothing like love, family, and God. It was at that moment I finally told him the reason that we were at the beach was because our son had died on Easter weekend, on Good Friday, in fact. And that we had hoped to feel some comfort by being a little closer to God, which is what the beach feels like to us. We just couldn't make it through a commercialized, secularized Christmas this year. And believe me, when I tell you I was crying, and she says, and snorkeling while I spoke, and had snot blowing all over the place, just a blowing in the wind. This man, whoever he was, merely nodded his head and smiled lovingly at me. And while nodding his head and said yes. And she puts in here in parentheses, like, yeah, I know. He didn't give any condolences. Didn't say sorry for your loss. Didn't say any of the normal reaction statements. He simply said yes. His very next sentence was, Good Friday, Easter weekend, is especially significant for me. My father died on Easter weekend. And he says, I also was married. I married my bride on Easter weekend as well. Easter is a supernatural, special weekend. Don't you agree? Well, yeah, hello. Again, who is this man? She said that I approached them at this time and said hello to him. And the man said hello. And in the same sentence, asked Wade if we could pray for our family. And we both said yes. At the same time, he asked for all our names, and Wade, me and Ryan and Cooper, and the three of us held hands and prayed for about 10 minutes. A deep and spiritual prayer with him, repeatedly referring to God as Emmanuel, which I have forever known means God is with us. The man, the woman, and the child were long gone, and we never saw them again. I don't know if she addresses it here at this moment, and it's almost done, but I need to say this one thing, is that I don't know if she put it here, and she probably did, but I remember one thing in particular, the only thing I ever said to this man, and I'm never a loss for words, don't laugh for those who know me, is I remember very clearly when Laura had mentioned the fact that our son had passed on Easter weekend on Good Friday. This man looked at me I'm going to say this with assurance. I'm going to say this with unconditional love flowing from his eyes. And the only time he ever referenced me, the only time he ever, I don't want to say that he didn't acknowledge me because he knew I was there, but this whole basic conversation was really all centered towards Laura. But he looked at me with confirmation. And I've got to tell you, I've never seen eyes like that before. They were like the color of the ocean, and they were see-through. Remember that very clearly. And he looked at me and he said, and you know, you will see him again. And then looked away from me and then looked at Laura. I'm going to continue. We're almost done. The man and the woman and the child were long gone, and we never saw them again. And when the prayer was over, we said our goodbyes, and he started walking away. I have to say this part right here as well. Remember, I haven't said anything. Internally inside, because I have overheard and I have bore witness and I have seen, I am now saying to myself, this is either Jesus Christ manifested in the flesh, or this is an angel. This is too surreal. And I am on the inside saying, but remember, God told me to be quiet. So I haven't said 2 words during this entire exchange, everything that's been going on as we've been walking down this beach. But inside in my heart, I am screaming to myself, Laura, ask him his name. Because I know if she asks him his name, it's going to give it away of who this is. But remember, cat's got my tongue. I'm not saying a word. When the prayer was over, we said our goodbyes and he started walking away. I hollered out to him, asking his name. And I remember when she did, I was thinking to myself, yeah, how are you going to get away with this one? I'm just being real with you. That was my heart. And I remember she says that he stopped and turned around. Well, I'm going to tell you, to me, in that moment, while I was looking at the back of his head, I was thinking to myself, how are you going to? How are you going to give your name? That's exactly what I was thinking. He stopped and turned around and he smiled at her and said, it's wise. Let that sink in, folks. It's wise. Bill Wise. But you can remember me by saying, be wise. Be wise. And I don't ever forget. And she goes, he said, be wise and don't ever forget that God loves you all very much. And know you will see Ryan again. He hugged us and then turned around and walked away. Wade never spoke a word other than when he said hello and yes to the prayer. And I got to say something about this prayer, guys. I ain't never heard anybody pray like this. It was as though he stepped out of the oven, out of heaven, out of the fire. It was as though he had just stepped out of the throne room of God after talking to God and instantly was talking to us. That's the best way I can describe how this prayer was a prayer, because I was keenly listening to every word, and I ain't never heard anybody pray such intimacy, is a good way to put it. As though there was no question to this person, as though God was hearing every syllable and every word that he was saying. After he was gone, we both looked at each other and said simultaneously, angel at the same time. There's a little more to the story, but I'm crying so hard again, I'm going to stop now. I did manage to get my major highlights in here. I'm going to go back and we're going to close this podcast with this. God is near to the brokenhearted, and he saves those crushed in spirit. I want to encourage you today that however deep and wide and however intense the crushed of the spirit is, God will save. Garth Brooks sang a song of unanswered prayers. I will say right now that it might not be the way we think it will turn out or the way that we think that it will be, but I will tell you 100%, not 99, by the will of the Father, it will be our best interest 100%. whatever road that we're walking on, whatever that road looks like. You fill in the blanks. I just did with my and our personal testimony. I want to go back to that girl. I think it's very apropos how we close this, is that there are going to be, and rightfully so, because this is a fallen world, there are going to be crushing moments in our lives. And what I'm saying is for us to take a different prism through the looking glass at the struggle, at the issue, and see that in the hand of God, God can take any ash and turn it into beauty. I've already shared with you that in the beginning, I didn't see in any way, shape, or form how God could do that. I know now that even with this, that God can take ash and turn it into beauty. He can turn pain into purpose. And just like that young child who we found out had disabilities and she was blind. She couldn't see her father. Faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. And every time that father would clap, she knew exactly where to run to. I want to close it with this. The Word of God creates and strengthens faith. The ordinances confirm it. Trials refine it. Prayer stretches it. Community encourages it. God doesn't increase faith by magic or by manipulation. I'm going to say that again. God doesn't increase our faith by magic or manipulation. He grows it through truth and testing. And that, my friends, grows our inner person that's going to live on into eternity. I love you. Had a great time with this podcast. As always, keeping it real and raw. So remember, forecast for today is that God reigns and the sun shines. Until next time, bye-bye.